Good morning, everyone. Today is February 23rd, and we will be doing a webinar on using security labels inside of Windchill. My name is AJ Vetterini, and we will get underway here. Nope. So today in this webinar, what we're going to really talk about is demonstrating security labels. Specifically, I'll be inside of Windchill 12. However, pretty much actually everything I talk about applies backwards for a few Windchill versions, 11 and 10 for sure. So we're going to talk about security labels. We're also going to talk about this concept of a digital thread. Inside of security labels, I'm really going to talk about what they are as an overview, what are agreements, and some general best practices. I'm also going to go into a live demo and answer any questions you guys have. As a note, everyone in the webinar is currently muted. As you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to throw them in the questions or the chat panel, and I'll make sure to get to those. So about myself as an introduction, my name is Anthony Vetterini. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Engineering in Aerospace and Mechanical Engineering. About 5 years working in the CAD and CAE sphere, specifically with simulations. And recently, these past couple of years, I've really been focusing in on PLM and its applications. A little bit about us being PDSVISION. We are formerly known as Boundary Systems. We were acquired by PDSVISION in 2018 and recently changed some of our branding. So now we are actually PDSVISION North America. We are the first PTC global reseller. So that's something about us. In terms of capabilities, what we can do, we focus in on consulting, implementation, training. And at the bottom there, you see a little bit of timeline about us, where we've been. So we were founded back in 2006. PDSVISION itself was founded in about 2008. And we see in the timeline, we were acquired in 2018. And in the map in the top right, you kind of see where we operate. So I myself, as part of PDSVISION North America, is based in North America. We have offices kind of scattered throughout Europe, India, UAE, South Africa. So we do have a global presence. In terms of software, our biggest one obviously is PTC. But outside of the PTC software product line, we do have offerings like we see below, such as Cymerix, which is a CFD software, MoldX 3D, is like mold flow simulations. Keyshot is rendering. So we do have other software offerings outside of just the PTC offerings. Now, I'm going to kick off our webinar with a little talk about digital thread. However, I do want to tell you all that in a few weeks here, we are going to have more in-depth discussions about this digital thread. And I highly recommend you join in on those webinars to see a bit more in depth about what this topic is. But to talk about here roughly, the digital thread is connecting everyone in your organization, connecting all the bits of information. So what we see here in these rings, right, is the inner ring might be where your company would start, with CAD data management simulation. Then as you grow, maybe expand out to getting in like change management processes or quality management in ring 2. Then you keep moving as you grow. Maybe in ring 3, you bring in ERP integration, additive manufacturing, and you finish off maybe in connecting it all through augmented reality, cloud services, IoT. Where security labels kind of plays into all of this is actually controlling who can see certain data as you move out through this digital thread. Another way of visualizing it is this slide here. We see different compartments or different locations along in our, let's say, our company here. And the digital thread is this green line essentially that connects who might be stakeholders in a specific product development. And so to kind of reiterate, we will be having more webinars that talk directly about digital thread, but the focus of this webinar here is going to be security labels. So as an overview, at the most basic level of understanding, a security label is going to be a way for you to show or hide specific files to users and have it be in a documented fashion. These are highly customizable. They do not come activated out of the box is a big thing to know here. So PTC does offer a Windchill Security Labels configuration and implementation guide that goes pretty in depth as to how to turn these things on. They do require a systems level knowledge. So this is something that will require you having access to the server hosting your Windchill. And you're gonna be editing things like XML files. So they do require you to take your time and turn them on and follow this guide. Again, the guide is pretty in depth. I also would recommend that you know a little bit about using the PTC knowledge base and searching for articles in there to actually get these turned on in your environment. Other things to know about security labels is that they will require the modify security label policy. So there's policies you're going to need to actually add in to make sure you can actually, apply these to your objects. And the last thing to know is that groups are your friends. So security labels are really, truly group dependent. So the example I'm going to use in this whole webinar is this concept of export control. So controlling who can see specific objects based on, if it needs to have export licensing. And a way to control this information is to, at least at a basic level, is to control, who's a US person and who's not a US person in your organization maybe. That might control who can see certain objects. Another example is maybe what you're developing is like ITAR restricted at a specific product, but maybe you have non-US persons who are able to access certain objects for this full product. That's another way you could use security labels to control who can see what. And so in the demo, we'll actually see how these groups actually control who sees, your specific objects. But that is basic overview, right? Security labels are really just hiding and showing objects inside of Windchill. Past just our generic concept of security labels, another big aspect of them is agreements. So agreements are actual Windchill objects that are available at all context levels and authorize access to specific objects that are otherwise restricted by security labels. So these are, these are like a WT par or document. These are actual physical objects inside of Windchill, and because they're an object, they are going to require things like life cycles, and you can customize workflows and open up that whole can of worms of creating these agreements. Past, what are these going to let you do? These are going to let you grant like temporary access to objects that are otherwise restricted by security labels. So for example, if you are in control of your product security labels and you have a user who is a non-US citizen that you need to grant access to see a object that is restricted by a security label, you can grant them access to see that. Now you can give them access for however long of time. It has to be a minimum of 15 minutes, but you can give them access that lasts, a year, 2 years, 3 months, whatever it might be. You can grant that access through a through an agreement. Now agreements are optional. You don't technically need to turn these on, but they are nice to keep documented processes of who sees what. So for example, if you wanted to give access for a security label restricted object to a user, you can have a paper trail, a documented way of saying, hey, this user did see this object on these 2 days. So your organization is tracking and knowing who is seeing what data, which is important for any compliance you might need, and just tracking generally who is doing what. Now, the last slide I want to do before I hop into the actual demonstration purposes portion of this webinar is talk about some overall best practices. So I guess before we talk about best practice, the thing you need to know is, again, you need to be a system administrator to actually customize or turn on security labels. You need to actually access, where Windchill is installed, and you're going to be editing files inside of there. Some overall best practices now past that, once you recognize that you need to be a system admin, is I'd always recommend starting with the Windchill Security Labels Configuration and Implementation Guide from PTC. Use those default labels use those things those examples that PTC gives you, because it will help you actually understand security labels a bit. It will actually step you through, this guide will step you through, and you'll be able to actually see, what you're editing, why you're editing it, what are these things doing. So it is a very good guide to start out and actually get security labels turned on. Another best practice is if you're using agreements, you want to actually create those agreements prior to actually turning on or editing security labels. So what I mean by that is before you turn on security labels, if you go into your Windchill's type and attribute manager, you'll actually see an agreement object. So if you're going to use agreements inside of security labels, you actually want to create those inside of the types and attribute managers first, so you can actually edit, or so that you can actually turn them on when you go to do security labels. So you want those created first. Like most things, we'd always recommend starting this out on a test or dev environment. You don't want to just turn these on your production environment and see what happens. If you type something wrong or do something incorrectly, Windchill won't start. So you will actually, so that kind of goes more into, saying start on your dev environment. If that doesn't start up, you can troubleshoot there and not have your full production environment be down. So always do that. The second thing is to have a recovery plan. So like I was saying, if there's typos or if you mess something up and Windchill doesn't start, you have to kind of do some troubleshooting. You have to dive through possibly some PTC knowledge base articles. You have to maybe go line by line in the security labels file to figure out what is incorrect and not letting Windchill start. And so by having a recovery plan, have a backup. Copy that PTC folder where Windchill is stored, so that, hey, if something goes wrong, we can just boot up back where we know when Windchill started. So that's what we mean by have some form of a recovery plan. Have a backup, have a snapshot of the image ready of your server image, so you can just kind of roll back to that if you can't get these turned on. With that, pay very close attention to the security labels configuration file. So I'm going to show a little snippet of the one I'm using for the demonstration portion of this webinar. But you want to make sure you're closing out your arguments. So it's an XML file. So if you look in Figure 1 in the top right hand of the screen, you'll see that these labels are turned on. You want to make sure the enabled is true. You want to make sure you're closing out statements, things like that. And so this Windchill configuration implementation guide will be, guiding you through and making sure you're doing this. But you need to be very, very attentive of the edits and changes you're making to that file, because a lot of them are environment specific. There's going to be portions of the guide that you can't follow because it's going to depend on the way your actual environment is set up. This is why they do not come on out of the boxes. They are really environment specific. There's nothing, there's certain aspects of security labels that don't carry over from environment to environment. So that's a thing to note. The last recommendation we typically give is to start basic. Start with those examples, and as you get comfortable and understand security labels more and more, then you can expand out. So maybe we'll turn on agreements, or maybe we'll set up OIRs so that objects are created with security labels and we don't have to manually tell it OIRs being object initialization rules. You can create things like custom table views and do reports. But those are things we'd recommend doing once you start to understand security labels. After you get them turned on and you start to get a little bit more familiar with them, then you can start. Then we'd recommend going down this more customizable path. So I won't be talking about things like OIRs really, because that's a little bit more in depth. Here we're just trying to show you guys what security labels are and what they can do for you. So that's going to take me to a little bit of a demonstration purposes. And again, if you have any questions, please throw them in the questions pane or in the chat. I'll make sure to get to them towards the end of this presentation. So let me come out of here. And we're going to see we are in Windchill. Let me make sure the audience view. Yep. And so right now I'm logged in as Jay Smith. He is just an org admin. And I'm going to go to this Doomsday device product and come to my folders. And what we're going to see are just some documents. And I have a custom view, and over in this column, we see the export control column, and we can see specific objects are shown and aren't, or see the security label on these objects. So we see a few objects don't have any license required, screws, bolts, and brackets. We're locally sourcing those inside the US. Those aren't leaving the US, or they don't require an export control in this general example. So everyone could see those. However, for our Doomsday device here, we have a big laser and a top secret power source. Those are things that we need to have security labels for. So not everyone could see those. That's something we want to control. So right now, Jay Smith is able to see all those. That's why he sees these. However, if I log in as Sally Jones, which is this one, so up here in the top left, we see Sally Jones, and she goes to the Doomsday device. What we're going to see is she only sees the 3 objects that do not require a security label. Now, your question might be, how are we controlling that? And that's what I was saying was groups. So if I come back to Jay Smith, and I'm going to come to the org and actually look at our participant administration. And let's add in the 2 groups that I've set up for this security label, which is going to be US persons and non-US persons. So these are what are actually controlling who can see what objects. So if we come into US persons, we see John Smith and WC admin. In the non-US persons, we see Sally Jones. And so let's say to give Sally Jones viewership, we want to add her to US persons. Best practice, let's first remove her from non-US persons. So let's remove Sally from there. And then come over into US persons and add her. And so what we will see when we get to this, so now we see Sally Jones is inside of the US persons. And if I were to open up this folder and now refresh the page, what we will see is that Sally Jones now has access to seeing those other 2 objects that were locked behind security labels. So again, that's really just showing at its most basic state what a security label is it's really just allowing view or allowing you to show or hide specific objects inside of a context, in this case, a product. I'm going to come back here now and actually remove Sally and put her back inside a non-US person so we can go talk about other concepts. So let me remove her and put her back in non-US persons. Oh, she's not there. Nope. Okay, she's there. So we see now she's back in non-US persons. She's not in US persons. And so if I go to this Doomsday device and refresh the page as Sally Jones, we will see that she now loses view to those other 2 objects that are locked behind a security label. What I now want to do is talk about agreements. And what do agreements do? So agreements will grant temporary access to viewing specific security labels. To do this, you actually need to have a agreement managers group. I know this because if I open up this XML file, this security label configuration file, and this is traditionally on the server, or this is where your install would be, we could see that in my agreement managers group, we actually have them set up. And the way you set all this and set these lines of XML code, again, is covered in that implementation guide I was talking about earlier. And so if I come in as a site level admin, so in this case, WC admin, and I come over to the site, I'm going to look at utilities and look at my agreement managers, as that's what I called my group. Now you could call this whatever. It's just specified in this file, in this case, agreement managers. And we can look and see inside of this agreement manager is John Smith, and I also set WC admin, who I'll use to actually set these agreements. Now, the other thing to know with agreements is, like I said, is you have to actually create them at the type and attribute manager. So I'm going to open this up. There we go. And if we look in manage types, we actually see an agreement object. And I created two agreements called CEA and SEA. So based on a commercial license or state license, those are the two objects we have here. And I created those. And again, this is stuff we specify in the security labels configuration. So we see here, we see the CEA here, and right above it will be SEA based on the export license we have assigned. So again, these are things, as I said earlier, that you want to create before you actually even churn on security labels. You want to make sure these are created first. Let's go back to utilities, and we'll come over to this Doomsday device where WC admin is part of the team. And when we do the drop down, we'll actually see agreements is an option now. Now, you won't see this if you do not have security labels turned on. You will not see the agreements tab. This will only pop up as you turn it on. And so let's go over to our agreements. And what we will now see is any agreements we've created. So I did like a little demo example one earlier. We'll see what type it is, what its status is. So that is what I was saying is these do have life cycles associated with it. And so this one is expired. If I click on the information icon, we'll actually see what that agreement did. So it has the paper trail. It has, it's keeping track of who's doing what. So we see the site admin, which is WC admin, gave access to the super laser development plan. And here's where it lasted from. So we have that. We come over to authorized participants. We could see who was granted access. So Sally Jones inside of this product. So we have the full trail. We know who was given access. Creating agreements. So if we come back to just agreements as WC admin, it's very simple, right? You create a new agreement and just kind of follow the prompts. They're all pretty straightforward. So as we create it, we'll create an SCA. And I think this is the super laser. Sally Jones, as just what I'll name it. Time, how long or how short do you want the agreement to last? So how long do you want to give Sally Jones a view for? So I'm gonna have it start today, and we'll have it end, I guess, on this weekend. And the time zone for these is based on your Windchill environment setup. So I'm in Mountain Time. You can tell by the time in the bottom right. So this will look a little bit different. So I'll just have it started retroactively at 1 a.m. today. Right? Yeah. Life cycle in this case is generated. Obviously, if you want to customize it, that is things you can do. We could go into our life cycle management for an agreement and change that. Next, we're going to add just the current context. In this case, it's just the Doomsday device. And now we can choose what we're granting. So in this case, for the FCA, I can grant the state license. These other ones we can't check because it's not part of the FCA. And that is all from this configuration file. So I'm granting, you could choose what lifecycle states of an object you want to grant. In this case, I'm just saying everything. We could actually authorize changes. So in this case, I'm not authorizing by default. And then we can add participants. So you can add 1, 2, or a whole group of people. In this case, I'm just going to give it to Sally Jones. And click OK. And so she's an authorized participant. And the last part to the agreement is actually giving her a specific object she can see. Now, the thing to note is that only one object can be associated with a agreement. So it's only one per. What I mean by that, once we get through this, so let me search to this Doomsday device and get the super laser. Yeah, it's that one. only one object can be authorized per agreement. So when I finish this, I can't add more than one agreement or one object to this agreement. So you'd have to create multiple. Now, like I was saying, again, to reiterate, these are objects. They have life cycles. Right now, it's inactive. You could have a workflow that goes with it. I'm just going to set the state to approved. Click OK. And so now we see it is active. So that means if I were to go to Sally Jones, which is this window here, and refresh the page, she should now see the super laser. So she does not see the other one. So if I go over to Jay Smith and come back to the product, since he is a member of US persons, he sees everything. He can see everything, including the power source document. Back to Sally, since the site admin gave her viewing only to the super laser document, their development plan, she can only see that. She doesn't get to see the other object. And the big benefit to all this, again, if I come back to WC admin, is there's documentation. We know that Sally was able to see this document. We could click on the information and see when she saw this, this information. And so that is agreements. And so I believe that is everything I wanted to show today. As I talked about, there's a lot more in depth you can get, such as OIRs, creating custom table views, creating workflows and things like that just start to get more into the woods, deep into the woods, kind of out of scope of a webinar. And so before I open up or start looking at some of these questions, if you want to learn more about Windchill and its customization, such as security labels, we do have trainings for it. This is kind of covered and partially in the business administration class, and we also just can do little one-on-one trainings to get these things turned on. And you can also go to our website, PDSVISION.us, to actually see a full list of classes that we do offer. And so I will open up some questions. If you do have any other questions, if you think of anything down the road, feel free to email me. My email is on the screen now, aveterini@pdsvision.us. Also, this webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube channel down the road. So if you go on PDSVISION on YouTube, you'll be able to find this webinar probably about tomorrow. It will be uploaded. Now I will open up some questions. The first one is, do you have to use agreements? And the answer is no. So security labels out of the box. I'm just going to come back to Jay Smith. If you don't want agreements, if you don't want to even open up that can of worms to allow people to see specific objects, you do not have to turn them on. What you would do when you set up your security label is just everything that's part of this agreement, you would get rid of, and you'd only have the security label. So there's no need for agreements. Those are just kind of an optional thing that I do like to show because they do give access, temporary access. The reason I choose to show them is a common question that I'll explain here is, why would I use security labels? It's a hassle to turn them on. But there's other ways I could find a way to do this. And the answer is no. These are really meant for restrictive environments, being security labels. And there's not really another way to accomplish them. There are things like ad hoc permissions that you could give to specific objects. But the big downfall to those is those don't do the same thing as security labels. There's no documentation of who's giving who permissions. Those are not ideal for what security labels are trying to do. These are really meant to be restrictive and to grant access and have documentation of who is seeing what. That is really the big goal of our security labels here. So that's a common question we do get is about the restrictiveness or the, how long it takes. Another question is, how do these work with Creo and CAD objects? And it's all actually the same thing. So I just have a document type here because it was easy to create. But if there was a CAD file here, it would operate in the same way. When you go to check it in, I guess I will show this real quick. Is if you go to a product, so let's go to our Doomsday device, and let's look at the policy administration. And let me just come to this device. The policy you need to be knowledgeable of is modify security labels. So it's actually a policy. And so out of the box, if you turn these on, the only person who will be able to edit these will be like the product manager or whoever has full control of a product. But what we could do is say, for a type, EPM. We could say for a CAD document, in all lifecycle states, and say, whoever, I'll just say WC admin. We could give that permission for them to actually edit the security labels. And I'm not going to apply this, but you would. And even if this was a CAD object, all you would do is right click it, and at the very bottom, we see there's an edit security labels. And that's across the board for all different types of objects. And you can edit it and specify it. There's also things you can do in the actual setup of security labels, so that if it's a new CAD document and someone's checking it in, you could have it prompt them to actually specify a security label. Or if everything you are creating is going to have security labels, that is probably when you'd want to investigate using OIRs to just initialize a security label value into new objects, for example. So when you go to edit the security label of an object, in this case, the top secret power source, you can actually specify it here. And so these were the security labels I created for export control or options. So we have no license, license required, state, commercial, do not export, and unknown. And again, to reiterate, if it was a CAD object, Creo, SolidWorks, whatever, this is all the same. The only thing that would look different is you'd see the little CAD icon over here. Security labels are totally just Windchill dependent. And the only thing that it cares about is what object it is, object type. And by default, security labels will apply to all objects. So yeah, no difference in operation. They all work the same as long as they're turned on for that object. So that, let me see real quick. So that looks like the end of the questions. Again, I do want to pop up my email here just in case. So I'll do from current slide. Yep. So my email is on the screen here. If you have any questions about these, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be able to answer your questions regarding security labels. I could provide you that implementation guide, PTC implementation guide if you need it. So we actually do get another question here. So if an assembly uses a restricted component that I don't have access to, does the assembly just fail, or does it give me a reason? So that's something I think I'll have to reach back out to you about. I'm actually not sure off the top of my head. I think it would give you I think what would happen is Windchill will give you a failure. It will give you a reason you can't check it out. But I will make sure to reach back out to you regarding that question. So make a note of that. Where is this? Yep. Okay. So yeah, I'll reach back out to you about that, but I do believe it just would fail. It would give Windchill would spit out an error at you. So yeah, with that said, if you have any questions down the line, anyone, please feel free to reach out to me. And I have a great rest of your days. And yeah.